If you are seeing this right now, understand this. It is not an accident. Nothing that reaches your awareness at exactly the moment you need it is ever an accident. There is an intelligence moving beneath the surface of your life, quietly arranging circumstances, quietly nudging your attention toward truths you're finally ready to receive. And the truth is, you have been sensing it for a while now, haven't you? A restlessness, a subtle inner friction that tells you the shape of your life as it currently stands is no longer a match for who you are becoming. You have felt it in the quiet moments, in the space between waking and rising, in the pause before you fall asleep. Something within you has already begun to shift, and the outer world simply hasn't caught up yet. Let that sink into your spirit for a moment. The change has already begun on the inside. What you are waiting to see with your eyes has already been decided within your consciousness. This is the secret that so few people ever discover, and the ones who do discover it are never the same again. They stop waiting for life to convince them that something good is coming. They start becoming the proof within themselves before any evidence appears in the world outside of them. Think about this for a moment. Every single thing you have ever experienced in your outer life first existed as a state of consciousness within you. Every relationship, every opportunity, every disappointment, every triumph was first assumed, first felt, first accepted as true on the inside long before it took form on the outside. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor. This is the actual mechanics of how a human being moves through reality. Consciousness is the only reality. Everything else, every circumstance, every condition, every fact that you have ever called solid and unchangeable is simply consciousness in a particular shape, waiting to be reshaped by a new assumption. You must realize that the world you see is not something happening to you. It is something happening through you. It is the outer reflection of an inner conversation you have been having with yourself, often unconsciously, for years. And the moment you understand this, you can never again see yourself as a victim of your circumstances. You can never again believe that you are simply waiting around for luck or timing or other people to decide what your life will become. You are the one deciding. You have always been the one deciding. You simply weren't aware that you were the one holding the pen. Feel this deeply. Somewhere within you right now, there is a version of yourself who has already stepped into the change you have been longing for. That version already exists. Not in some distant future you must earn your way toward, but in the eternal present, in the timeless now, where all possibilities already live simultaneously. The you who has already moved into the new home, already healed the relationship, already received the recognition, already built the life aligned with your soul's true desire, that version of you is real right now, in consciousness, waiting only for your attention to shift toward it long enough, and with enough feeling, that it becomes your new home base. This is why so many spiritual teachers throughout history spoke in symbols and parables instead of plain instructions. Because the truth cannot simply be told to the mind, it must be felt by the soul. When the ancient scriptures speak of the kingdom of heaven being within you, they are not describing a location. They are describing a state of consciousness so aligned, so assumed, so deeply felt as true, that it must inevitably express itself as your outer experience. The kingdom is not somewhere you go. The kingdom is something you become on the inside and then witness unfolding on the outside. Understand this. When it is written that you must ask, believe, and receive, it is not describing three separate steps spread across time. It is describing a single inner motion. To ask is to define clearly and specifically what state of being you desire to occupy. To believe is to assume that state as already true. To inhabit it in feeling, not simply to hope for it intellectually. And to receive is simply the natural, inevitable result of having assumed and felt the wish fulfilled long enough that your subconscious mind can no longer distinguish it from memory. Because that is what your subconscious does with any assumption held with feeling. It does not judge whether the assumption is currently visible in the physical world. It simply works tirelessly, faithfully to bring your outer conditions into agreement with whatever you have accepted as true within. Let this settle within you. Your subconscious mind is not your enemy, and it is not neutral either. It is faithful, it is obedient. It takes whatever you impress upon it, whatever thought you dwell in long enough, whatever feeling you return to again and again, and it begins weaving that impression into the fabric of your circumstance. This is why casual wishing rarely creates change, while deep, repeated, emotionally charged assumption almost always does. The subconscious does not respond to words alone. It responds to feeling. It responds to identity. It responds to the story you keep telling yourself about who you are and what is or is not possible for you. Consider this. If you have spent years assuming struggle, assuming lack, assuming that good things happen for other people, but somehow always seem delayed for you, your subconscious has been faithfully, obediently bringing you exactly that experience. Not to punish you, not because the universe is cruel, but because that is simply how consciousness works. It is impartial. It does not decide who deserves abundance and who deserves struggle. It simply mirrors back whatever has been assumed with enough emotional conviction to be accepted as true. This is both the most humbling and the most liberating truth you will ever encounter, because it means the very mechanism that may have created years of struggle is the exact same mechanism that can be redirected starting today to create an entirely different reality. Notice what happens when you stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And instead begin asking, what state have I been assuming? And what new state am I willing to assume instead? The first question keeps you tethered to the past, endlessly explaining your current conditions using old evidence. The second question opens a door. It hands you the pen again. It reminds you that you were never a passive character in this story. You are the author, the narrator, and the one whose imagination breathes life into every scene. Imagine for a moment what it would feel like to already be living inside the change you have been longing for. Not someday, not once certain conditions align. Right now, in this moment, imagine the relief of already having crossed over into that new chapter. Imagine how you would carry yourself. Imagine the tone of your voice, the posture of your body, the quiet confidence in your eyes, the way you would breathe differently, move differently, speak differently, simply because the anxious waiting has ended and the fulfillment has already arrived within you. Stay there for a moment. Let yourself really feel it, not as fantasy, but as truth temporarily unseen. This is the entire secret behind every genuine spiritual awakening. It is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you already are beneath the layers of conditioning, fear, and borrowed beliefs that convinced you otherwise. You were never meant to spend your life negotiating with lack. You were never meant to beg circumstances for permission to be at peace. You are not a beggar standing outside the gates of a good life, hoping to be let in. You are the very consciousness through which all experience is created. You are, in the deepest and most sacred sense, far closer to the divine than you have been taught to believe. The scriptures whisper this truth again and again, hidden in symbol, waiting for those with the ears to hear it. When it is written that God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, it is describing something far more intimate than a cosmic event that happened once long ago outside of you. It is describing the eternal creative pattern within every conscious being. You speak an inner word, an assumption, a feeling accepted as true, and your inner world responds by bringing forth exactly that. Every act of imagination is a small act of creation. Every sustained feeling is a seed planted into the fertile soil of your subconscious, destined to grow into the exact likeness of what was planted. You must realize that this is why the specific direction of your attention matters so much more than most people ever understand. Wherever your attention rests, your creative power flows. If your attention rests upon what is lacking, upon what is broken, upon what has not yet arrived, you continue watering the very conditions you wish to leave behind. But if your attention rests upon the feeling of the wish already fulfilled, upon gratitude for what is becoming, upon the quiet knowing that the change has already been decided within you, you begin watering an entirely different garden. And in time, without needing to force anything, without needing to manipulate a single external circumstance, that garden begins to bloom into your outer life. Let that sink in. You do not need to figure out the how. You do not need to control every person, every timeline, every external detail in order for your desired change to unfold. Your only true responsibility, spiritually speaking, is to become the person internally who already has that change. The how will organize itself quietly behind the scenes, exactly the way a seed does not need to understand botany in order to grow into a tree. It simply needs the right internal conditions, and it does the rest, guided by a wisdom far greater than its own small awareness. This is why signs like the one that brought you here today matter so much. They are not proof that something magical is being done to you from the outside. They are gentle confirmations that your own inner state is beginning to shift, that a part of you is remembering its true creative authority, and that the universe, which is really just consciousness responding faithfully to itself, is beginning to rearrange itself to match your new inner direction. When you notice repeated signs, synchronicities, subtle nudges pointing you toward change, understand that these are not random. They are reflections, mirrors, confirmations that the assumption forming quietly within you has begun its outward journey into form. Think about this for a moment. Every great transformation in your life, whether it was a shift in career, a change in relationship, a healing of the body, a breakthrough in finances, was always preceded by an inner shift long before the outer world caught up. You may not have recognized it at the time, but somewhere within you, an old identity was released and a new one was quietly assumed. Perhaps you stopped believing you had to struggle so hard. Perhaps you finally accepted that you deserved to be treated with respect. Perhaps you simply got tired of carrying an old story and let it fall away. Whatever it was, that inner release and inner acceptance always came first. The outer change was simply consciousness catching up to what had already shifted within you. This means that the big changes you are sensing now, the reason this message found you at exactly this moment, are not something you must chase or force into existence. They are something you must allow by first becoming internally the version of yourself who naturally exists on the other side of that change. Allow yourself to see this clearly. You are not behind schedule, you are not late, you are not being punished by delay. You are simply in the sacred, often uncomfortable, space between the old identity dissolving and the new identity fully anchoring itself within you. This space can feel disorienting, even frightening at times, because the old familiar patterns start to lose their grip, while the new ones have not yet fully solidified into visible form. But understand this in-between space is exactly where all true transformation happens. It is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is a sign that something sacred is underway. Feel this deeply. You are being reshaped right now, whether or not you can yet see it clearly in your outer circumstances. The very fact that you are drawn to messages like this one, that your soul is hungry for deeper truth, that you no longer feel satisfied simply going through the motions of an old, smaller life, is itself the evidence of an awakening already occurring within you. Awakening rarely announces itself with fireworks. Most often it arrives quietly, as a growing discomfort with what used to feel acceptable, and a growing hunger for something more aligned with who you truly are. Consider this. Perhaps you have outgrown relationships that once felt comfortable, but now feel confining. Perhaps work that once felt meaningful now feels hollow. Perhaps habits and patterns that once numbed your pain now feel like chains holding back your becoming. This is not you falling apart. This is you finally rising into a truer version of yourself. And the old structures of your life simply cannot hold the expanded consciousness you are stepping into. Just as a snake must shed its skin in order to grow, you too must be willing to release what no longer fits in order to make room for what is arriving. You must realize that resisting this process only prolongs the discomfort. When you cling tightly to the old identity, the old assumptions, the old fears, you create an inner tug of war between the self that is dissolving and the self that is emerging. But when you consciously choose to release the old story, when you say with quiet inner authority, this is no longer who I am now the one who has already moved into the new reality. You cooperate with the natural unfolding of your own becoming, rather than fighting against it. Let this settle within you. Every spiritual tradition throughout history has, in its own language, described this same eternal process: death and resurrection, the old self crucified, the new self raised, the caterpillar dissolving completely within the cocoon before it can become a butterfly. These are not separate stories. They are the same universal truth, expressed through different symbols, pointing toward the same reality. That transformation always requires the willingness to let an old identity die so that a new one, more aligned with your soul's truth, can rise in its place. Understand this. The discomfort you may be feeling right now, if you are honest with yourself, is not a sign that you are failing. It is a sign that you are finally allowing an outdated version of yourself to fall away. The anxious grasping, the constant need for certainty, the fear of the unknown, these belong to the old self. The self who believed safety could only be found by clinging to what was familiar. But you are being called now into a deeper trust, a trust not in external circumstances, but in your own inner creative authority, and in the quiet intelligence that has always been guiding your becoming, even in moments when you couldn't yet see the full picture. Think about this for a moment. What if the changes coming into your life are not things happening to you, but things happening for you, and more precisely, through you, because you have finally become ready on the level of consciousness to receive them? What if every delay you've experienced was never punishment, but simply the necessary time required for your inner assumption to fully solidify, so that when the outer manifestation finally arrives, you are truly capable of sustaining it, rather than losing it again through unconscious doubt? This is why patience, true spiritual patience, is not passive waiting. It is active inner alignment. It is the daily, sometimes hourly, choice to return your attention back to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, back to the identity of the one who has already received the change, rather than collapsing back into old anxious questioning about when or how it will arrive. Every time you catch yourself slipping into doubt, and gently, without self-judgment, return your attention to the assumption of already having what you desire, you are strengthening the very inner structure that will eventually give birth to your outer transformation. Allow yourself to see this clearly. This is not about denying your current circumstances. It is not about pretending that everything is already perfect if it clearly is not. It is about recognizing that your current circumstances are simply the crystallized result of past assumptions, that you are not obligated to keep assuming the same thing simply because it currently appears as fact. Facts belong to the past. Truth belongs to the present moment, and truth is whatever you choose right now to accept as your new reality within your own consciousness. Feel this deeply. You have more power over your inner world than any external condition has power over you, unless you hand that power away by continuing to believe that circumstances are the cause rather than the effect. Reclaim that power now, not through force, not through anxious effort, but through calm, quiet, persistent inner assumption. Decide right now what state of being you wish to occupy. Decide what version of your life you are ready to claim as your new normal. And then gently, patiently, lovingly begin living from that assumption. In your imagination, you're feeling in the quiet conversations you have with yourself, long before it appears with your physical eyes. This is why some of the greatest teachers of consciousness taught their students to live in the end. Not to live in constant anxious striving towards some future goal, but to mentally and emotionally dwell as though the goal has already been achieved, the desire already fulfilled, the change already complete. Because when you live in the end, you are no longer vibrating on the frequency of lack, longing, or absence. You are vibrating on the frequency of fulfillment, and it is that frequency, sustained with feeling over time, that your subconscious mind faithfully translates into outer form. Notice what happens when you begin practicing this, even quietly, even privately, without needing to explain it to anyone else. Notice how your mood shifts. Notice how your interactions with others change, simply because you are no longer approaching life from a place of scarcity, but from a place of quiet inner fulfillment. People will begin responding to you differently, not because they consciously notice anything different, but because your entire energetic signature has shifted, and the outer world always responds to the inner frequency being broadcast, whether anyone involved is consciously aware of it or not. Understand this. You are not being asked to perform positivity. You are not being asked to force a smile over pain that is real. Spiritual transformation is not about pretending. It is about redirecting your deepest, most sincere attention toward the truth of who you are becoming, rather than only the truth of where you currently stand. Both can be honored. You can acknowledge present difficulty honestly, while still choosing deliberately to plant your attention in the soil of your desired future state. This is not denial, this is spiritual maturity. This is consciously choosing where your creative power flows, rather than allowing it to flow unconsciously toward whatever is loudest or most immediately visible. Consider this. The sign that brought you here today is an invitation, not a guarantee handed to you passively, but an invitation for you to participate consciously in your own becoming. The changes ahead are real. They are already forming in the unseen realm of consciousness. But how smoothly, how gracefully, and how quickly they arrive into your visible experience depends largely on how willingly you release resistance, how consistently you return to the feeling of fulfillment, and how deeply you allow yourself to trust the process even when the outer world has not yet caught up to what you already know to be true within. Let that sink into your spirit. Trust is not naivety. Trust is not blind hope. True spiritual trust is the quiet, settled inner knowing that comes from understanding how consciousness actually works. When you know, truly know, not just intellectually but experientially, that your inner assumptions shape your outer world, you no longer need external proof before you can feel peace. You carry the peace first because you understand that the peace itself, sustained as an inner state, is the very mechanism that draws the corresponding outer conditions toward you. Think about this for a moment. How different would your life feel if you stopped chasing peace as a reward for certain conditions being met, and instead chose peace first, as the very atmosphere from which new conditions are born? How different would your relationships feel if you stopped waiting for others to change before you allowed yourself to feel secure, and instead cultivated security within yourself first, allowing your relationships to naturally realign around that new inner steadiness? How different would your finances feel if you stopped associating abundance only with a certain number in a bank account and instead cultivated a felt sense of abundance within your own consciousness, regardless of current circumstances, allowing outer abundance to become simply the natural echo of that inner state? This is why the teachings of imagination as the truly creative power within every human being are so revolutionary, even though they were spoken thousands of years ago in symbolic and parable form. Because most people have been taught to believe that imagination is merely fantasy, merely a pleasant escape from reality, rather than understanding that imagination is, quite literally, the very substance from which all future reality is formed. What you imagine vividly and feel is true does not remain locked inside your mind. It moves through the mechanism of assumption and subconscious impression into the material world of your experience. You must realize that every invention, every work of art, every relationship, every business, every healing began first as an image held in someone's imagination, felt as real before it ever took physical form. This is not unique to a select few gifted individuals. This is the birthright of every human consciousness. You possess this same creative power right now, in this very moment, whether or not you have been consciously using it, and whether or not the results you've created so far have been the ones you consciously desired. Feel this deeply. The same power that may have unconsciously created struggle in your past is the exact same power capable of consciously creating breakthrough in your future. Nothing about you is broken. Nothing about you needs to be repaired from the outside. What is required is simply redirection, a conscious turning of your creative attention toward the state you wish to inhabit, sustained with enough feeling and repetition that it becomes your new default setting, your new home within consciousness. Let this settle within you. Big changes are not something that happens randomly to lucky people while everyone else waits helplessly on the sideline. Big changes are the natural outer expression of an inner shift that has already occurred or is currently occurring within your own consciousness. The very fact that you were drawn to this message, that something within you resonated deeply enough to keep you here until this very sentence, is proof that a shift is already underway within you. You would not have been led here otherwise. Understand this. You are being prepared right now, not through external circumstances forcing themselves upon you, but through an inner deepening, an inner remembering of who you truly are and what you are truly capable of creating. Allow yourself to feel gratitude now, not for what has not yet arrived in physical form, but for the fact that the process has already begun, that the assumption has already been planted, and that in perfect timing, aligned with your own inner readiness, the out expression of that assumption will unfold exactly as it should. Consider this: gratitude felt now before the physical evidence appears is one of the most powerful creative forces available to you because gratitude assumes fulfillment. Gratitude assumes that the desired change is already, in some real and sacred sense, complete. When you feel grateful now, rather than waiting for external proof to justify that gratitude, you accelerate the entire creative process because you are aligning your inner frequency directly with the state of having already received rather than the state of still lacking. Imagine for a moment carrying this quiet, grateful, expectant energy with you throughout your ordinary day. Not anxious anticipation, but calm, settled knowing. Imagine moving through your responsibilities, your conversations, your quiet moments alone, all while holding this inner secret that change is already unfolding, that the shift has already begun, that you are simply watching with patient faith as the visible world rearranges itself to match what has already been decided within your own consciousness. This is who you truly are, not a victim of circumstance waiting anxiously for permission to feel at peace, not a beggar outside the gates of a good life hope. You are the very consciousness through which reality is being shaped moment by moment, thought by thought, feeling by feeling. You are not separate from the divine creative power spoken of throughout every sacred tradition. You are its living expression, walking through this world, learning slowly, sometimes painfully, but always surely, to remember your true authority. You are not someone who must beg the universe for change. You are someone who declares quietly and with deep inner conviction exactly what state you are choosing to occupy, and then lives faithfully from that assumption until the outer world has no choice but to conform to it. This has always been your power. It was never taken from you. It was simply forgotten, buried beneath years of conditioning that taught you to look outward for permission rather than inward for creation. Notice what happens when you begin to view your daily life not as a series of random events, but as a mirror faithfully reflecting the state you have been living in on the inside. This shift in perception alone can change everything. Instead of reacting to circumstances as though they are happening independently of you, you begin to ask a deeper question each time something unwanted appears. You begin to ask, what within me has been agreeing with this? Not from a place of guilt, never from a place of self blame, but from a place of quiet curiosity. Because understanding the source of a pattern is always the first step toward gently releasing it. Think about this for a moment. So many people spend years trying to change their outer circumstances directly, working harder, forcing new outcomes, negotiating with fate, without ever addressing the inner state that keeps recreating the very conditions they are trying to escape. This is why effort alone, without inner alignment, so often feels exhausting and incomplete. You can rearrange the furniture in a house 1,000 times, but if the foundation itself is cracked, the same problems will keep resurfacing in new forms. The foundation is your assumption. The foundation is the identity you have quietly accepted as true about yourself and your life. Change the foundation, and everything built upon it must eventually change as well. Consider this. You do not need to know exactly how your desired change will unfold. In fact, trying to control every detail of the how often becomes its own form of resistance because it keeps your attention anchored in the anxious energy of figuring it out, rather than the peaceful energy of already having received it. The infinite intelligence within you, the same intelligence that grows a forest without instruction, that beats your heart without your conscious effort, that heals a wound while you sleep, is far more capable of orchestrating the details of your transformation than your conscious mind could ever manage through sheer force or worry. Allow yourself to see this clearly. Surrender in the spiritual sense is not giving up. It is not passivity. It is the confident release of the how into a wisdom greater than your own limited human reasoning, while you remain faithfully devoted to holding the feeling of the wish fulfilled. This is a very different kind of surrender than the world usually teaches. It is not surrender to defeat. It is surrender into trust. It is placing your inner assumption into the hands of a creative process that has never once failed to bring form to whatever has been deeply and faithfully impressed upon it. Feel this deeply. There will be moments, perhaps even today, perhaps in the coming days, when doubt will try to creep back in. Old patterns of thought do not disappear overnight, simply because you have understood a new truth intellectually. This is normal. This is part of the process. When doubt arises, do not fight it with more anxious effort. Simply notice it, acknowledge it gently, and return as many times as needed to the feeling of the state you have chosen to occupy. Every return is a small act of faith. Every return strengthens the new inner structure you are building, brick by brick, feeling by feeling, until it becomes more familiar to you than the old structure ever was. You must realize that spiritual growth is rarely linear. It moves in spirals, revisiting familiar themes at deeper and deeper levels of understanding each time. You may feel as though you have already learned a particular lesson about trust or worthiness or inner authority, only to find life presenting you with a new version of that same lesson, inviting you to embody it even more fully than before. This is not failure, this is refinement. Each spiral brings you closer to the fullest, most stable expression of the truth you are learning to live from. Let this settle within you. The changes ahead are not meant to simply happen to you and then leave you unchanged. They are meant to reveal to you more and more clearly the creative power that has always been yours. Each manifestation, each answered assumption, each moment where your inner world finally meets your outer world in perfect agreement becomes further proof, not just intellectually understood, but experientially known, that you are indeed the operant power in your own life. And once this becomes undeniable to you, once you have witnessed it enough times to trust it completely, fear begins to lose its grip over you in an entirely new way. Understand this. A person who truly knows their own creative authority does not need external validation to feel secure. They do not need every circumstance to be perfect in order to feel calm. They carry their security within because they understand that circumstances are simply the outer shadow of an inner substance, and that shadow can always be reshaped by returning attention to the substance itself. This is the deepest form of freedom available to any human being, the freedom that does not depend on controlling the outer world, but instead rests entirely on mastering the inner one. Let that sink into your spirit one final time. The sign that brought you here today was never. It was a whisper from the deepest part of your own being, a gentle reminder that you are not falling apart, you're falling into alignment. The discomfort of the old self dissolving, the quiet ache for something more meaningful, the restless hunger for a life that finally matches your soul's truth, all of it is evidence that transformation is already underway. And from this moment forward, you carry this understanding with you, not as an abstract idea to admire, but as a living truth to embody in your feeling, in your imagination, in the quiet assumptions you choose to dwell in, day after day, until the world you have been dreaming into being finally, faithfully, and unmistakably becomes the world you're living in.